This is the lecture for chapter 1.1, the first part of it. So have your note sheets out that look like this, and we'll go ahead and you should also either have access to the PowerPoint so that you can get some information down. We also talk about this in class, so this is kind of review for you, or you can look at it before we get to class. All this will help you understand the material better. And so the first thing we want to look at, the goals of this first section, here are the objectives of what we're going to learn in this section. So the first thing we want to think about, we already talked about this in class, is what is statistics? Why do we care about it? But there is an exact definition, at least from our textbook, and then you have it right here. Statistics is the science of collecting, organizing, summarizing, and analyzing information. And we've done some of that already in class, and we will, so you get a good example of what that is. And so statistics is a science. And again, it's broken up into these areas, and we'll be doing all of these things in class. Another thing we want to think about is why do we care about statistics? How does it influence your life? And we kind of look at that a little bit with that first TED.com assignment of statistics in the real world. So go ahead and get that definition down in your note sheets. I'm not going to take time to write that down, but you get that down. As you're doing that, again, you can pause or go ahead. But the other thing that you need to know is that when we do statistics and we collect information, that information is called data. And what that data does is describe characteristics of individuals. And those characteristics, data describes characteristics of individuals. In this case, they can either be what we call them, those characteristics can be what we call qualitative. It's hard to read that, sorry. Qualitative, or the other one is quantitative. Qualitative has to do with qualities, your hair color, your personality. Quantitative has to do with numbers. How tall are you? What's your age? And that's the difference in the data that we'll be looking at. In this class, we emphasize quantitative data because we're going to deal with the numbers in the class. Qualitative, again, is more advanced in terms of when we characterize things, but we use qualitative data also in this class. And so I want you to be mindful of that. Another important piece of this part is the process of doing statistics, and we'll examine that and talk about what does it mean to actually do statistics and how do we do it. And so there's some terms that we need to know. What is the entire group to be studied called? And again, I'm getting this from our notes or from our book or from our PowerPoint here. But when we do statistics, we're interested in learning about a population of people. And what we do usually is conduct samples, and within those samples and populations, we have these individuals. So the entire group of individuals is called the population, and then a sample is a subset. An important word there. It's a subset of the population. So you want to be able to put that in there here. And so what is the entire group called? That is called a population. That's called a population. That's the entire group. What do we call a person or object as a member of the population? Those are the individuals. So if you conduct a study, we're going to ask individuals. And then the definition of a sample, you have that in the notes, but it's a subset of the population. A piece of, misspelled that, a subset of the population. And so you want to make sure you're aware of that. What do we call the numerical summary of a sample? What do we call a numerical summary of a population? And so what's going to happen is after we collect data from a sample, we summarize it in some way. And so what we call a numerical summary, in this case, we call that a statistic. And so you've used that word before, and the way you probably didn't know what it meant, it refers to a sample. And so that's what we have there. If we have data or information on the population, we call that summary or that information parameters. And so then you have that there. And so in this class, we're going to collect data. We're going to analyze it. It's going to come from a sample or a population. More than likely, it's going to come from a sample because that's all we have access to. And then we're going to do two types of statistics, descriptive and inferential, and you want to take time to write that definition down. I'll get that there. I'll talk through it, but I'm not going to write that down. Descriptive statistics consist of organizing and summarizing data. Okay, so that's what we're going to do early on in our first few chapters of the class. After that, we get into something called inferential statistics, which uses methods to take results from the sample, and then we extend them. We make inferences, that's a key word, inferential, inferences, or predictions about the population after we collected the data. So make sure you get those definitions down. Here I'm not going to write them down, but you can put those into that location there. Now let's take a look at some short examples real quick here. Example 1, suppose the percentage of all students on your campus who have a job is 84.9%. This value represents a parameter or a statistic. In this case, this is because we referenced all of the students right there, where it says all of the students. We would consider that value. That value would be considered a, let's change colors now, this would be considered a parameter. A parameter because it's referencing all the students. Parameter goes with the population. And suppose you have a sample of 250 students. This value represents a, what we call a statistic. And it's a statistic again because it's coming from a sample. A lot of people memorize that or remember because parameter, population, statistics comes from a sample because it's based on a sample. And so I can write that there. That's a sample, and this is a summary of a population. It's so important to know that there. And so let's finish this off. Think about these questions real quick. I'll pause the video real quick and I'll answer them real fast. Okay, now that we're back, I've highlighted the answers here. The percent of students in the survey who returned the money to the owner is 78%. This is descriptive statistics. Again, going back to the definition that we talked about. And then this is an example of inferential statistics because it's giving some level of confidence about a certain percent of the population. It's giving us some, like here again, some level of confidence. We're going to study more in depth inferential statistics later in the semester. In this case here, this 48.2 is a parameter because it's the percent of all students. And this is a sample, and so this value is a statistic. And lastly, to end this first part of the lecture is let's kind of review this idea. What does it actually mean to do statistics, and what does the process look like? Again, there are 4 steps, getting them from the PowerPoint. There we go, right here. You can fill those in. The first one is you're going to identify a research objective. This is how we do statistics. You determine a question that you want answered about the world, and you figure out how I'm going to answer that. You start by identifying what's the population of interest that you want to study. The next thing is you collect the data needed to answer the question you posed in number 1. And so that would be what we'll learn how to do there. After that, after you have the data in your possession, we describe the data. It's telling some story, and we'll go through that. You can see that's chapters 2 through 4, and then we perform inference, and we look at that in the later chapters. What conclusions can we make about the data that we collected, and what story is it telling? So go ahead and finish that, and that's the first part of chapter 1.1.